5 years ago, there was no standard comparable way to measure how effectively a brain-computer interface actually worked. Today, there is bits per second, the same unit engineers used to measure the speed of a data connection, now being used to measure how much usable information a human brain can transmit to a computer through a chip. Four different companies using four genuinely different engineering approaches are now racing head-to-head on exactly this number. The metric, often abbreviated BPS, quantifies how much usable information transfer from neural intent to a completed action, moving a cursor, selecting a letter, accounting for both speed and accuracy together rather than either measure in isolation. For context, able-bodied humans trying or using a mouse conventionally operate at roughly 10 bits per second. That's the benchmark every brain-computer interface in this race is ultimately measuring itself against. Can a signal read directly from a neuron's match or eventually exceed the information throughput of a healthy hand on a keyboard? The current field breaks into genuinely distinct engineering bits, not just competing brands of the same idea. Neuralink's approach is maximally invasive and maximally high resolution, a chip implanted directly into the motor cortex using over 1,000 ultra-thin electrode threads to record signals with extraordinary precision. Synchron takes the opposite approach, threading a stent-like device through blood vessels to reach a position near the motor cortex without any open brain surgery at all, trading some signal resolution for a dramatically lower surgical risk profile. Paradromics is pursuing a high bandwidth invasive approach specifically optimized for speech restoration, and BrainGate, an academic research consortium rather than a company, has spent nearly 2 decades building the foundational science much of this entire field now builds on. The publicly reported peer-reviewed numbers are genuinely striking. Neuralink's first human patient achieved cursor control performance published at over 9 bits per second, matching typical able-bodied performance by 2026. Neuralink's second patient using the company's upgraded higher electrode count implant reportedly achieved typical typing speed of 120 words per minute using neural signals alone. A result published in Nature Neuroscience and substantial jump from the roughly 40 words per minute the first patient achieved. Independent academic benchmarks for Stanford-affiliated PCI research have recorded bit rates as high as 10 per second under specific visible cursor conditions, while Synchron's blood vessel-based stentrode trading resolution for lower invasiveness currently operates at a meaningfully lower bit rates, below 5 per second, in comparable long-term use. Every one of these approaches runs into the same fundamental trade-off, just resolved differently: signal resolution versus invasiveness and long-term reliability. Placing electrodes directly in neural tissue gets you to the highest fidelity signal, but carries real surgical risk and a documented tendency for signal quality to degrade over time as the body's own tissue response affects the electrodes reading signals through a blood vessel wall or non-invasively through the scalp. All is dramatically safer to implant, but physically can't achieve the same resolution because the signal has to pass through more biological material before it's captured. No company in this race has escaped this trade-off. They have each simply chosen a different point of the same underlying curve. It is worth being direct about a real setback in this story because it illustrates the genuine engineering difficulty involved. Following Neuralink's first human implant, several of the ultra-thin electrode threads retracted from their optimal position within the brain tissue, reducing the number of electrodes capturing usable signal, rather than treating all of this as a failure requiring a full restart. The company adapted its software to extract more usable information from the remaining still functioning electrodes, partially compensating for the hardware setback through improved signal processing rather than hardware alone. Subsequent implants, in additional patients reportedly showed improved thread retention attributed to modified surgical technique, and the company's next generation device is specifically designed to address the underlying retraction issue with a revised electrode architecture. This kind of iterative, publicly partially disclosed failure and adaptation cycle is a genuinely useful signal for how mature and how far from mature this specific engineering problem actually is. Alongside the technical race, a parallel regulatory race is unfolding, and it's arguably just as consequential to which approach reaches wide deployment first. As of early 2026, Synchron's feasibility study hand implanted roughly 21 participants across the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and the United Arab Emirates, accumulating thousands of hours of real-world home-use data for cursor and keyboard control, a deliberately broad multi-country trial structure. Paradromics received FDA Investigational Device Exemption approval in November 2025 for its high data rate implant, with patient recruitment beginning in February 2026. Notably, China's Neuralink received its own commercial regulatory approval in March 2026 for a competing device targeting spinal cord injury patients, a signal that the regulatory race, not just the engineering race, is now genuinely international race rather than concentrated in the United States alone. Early in this field's development, the central question was simply whether any of these approaches could work reliably at all. That question is now largely settled. Multiple genuinely different hardware philosophies have demonstrated real replicated function in human patients. The competitive frontier has shifted decisively to bandwidth, how many bits per second of genuinely usable information each approach can sustainably extract over the long term, without degrading, which is precisely why this once obscure engineering metric has become the field's central comparable benchmark. The same way clock speed once became the shorthand metric computer processors were judged by. There is a specific kind of engineering satisfaction in watching a genuinely hard, previously unmeasurable problem get reduced to a single comparable number bits per second, precise enough that four fundamentally different hardware philosophies can now be judged on exactly the same scale. That's usually the sign a field has moved from proving a concept is possible to the considerably harder and more interesting work of actually optimizing it. Thank you so much for your presence. I hope you have enjoyed this as much as I have, and I'm really looking forward a meaningful discussion afterwards. Please ask your questions proactively. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them. Direct them directly at me. I will review each and every one of them, and I will respond to them once I have the chance. And stay tuned for the next subject. If you have any sort of suggestion, reflection, feedback, feel free to share it. It's an open community and highly receivable for your interactions of all its kind. I'm really glad for your presence, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next